Hello and welcome to today's episode of Owning Your Menopause. I'm super excited for today's guest, and I think you're going to love this one because I know how much we all love learning about how to nourish our bodies and nutrition through menopause. So today's guest is a leading dietitian and performance nutritionist specializing in women's health, menopause, and sports nutrition. She holds a PhD in public health and an MSc in human nutrition from King's College, London. Growing up in Zambia with a restaurateur mother and a health-conscious father, she developed a passion for science and nutrition. She's worked extensively with elite athletes and now runs her consultancy. As a spokesperson for the British Diabetic Association, she frequently appears in the media, translating complex nutritional science into practical advice. In 2024, she published an amazing book, Food for Menopause, offering evidence-based insights to help women navigate menopause through nutrition. Outside of her work, she is a passionate foodie and aspiring triathlete. Today, I'm so excited to bring you Dr. Linia Patel. Hello.
Hi, Kate. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you.
No, I'm so excited because I know your book came out sort of towards the back end of last year. You sent me a copy. I got it here. It's amazing. It's like every woman's Bible to nutrition. And the reason I love talking about nutrition because I think it is a place where women are, particularly at this life stage, really, really confused. We're going to come to that, but first of all, I want to know a little bit about you. I want our audience to know what inspired you to specialize sort of, I guess, in nutrition, particularly menopause.
Great question. So you kind of mentioned, so I'm born, bred, and buttered in Zambia, and then I'm a South African trained dietitian. And I kind of fell into nutrition actually. But once I realized it was my passion, I just went like, oh my goodness, I want to do everything. I had very strong passions, both in sport and in public health, and they're very, very different. But I actually began my career in sport. So I specialized in sport and I worked in South Africa at the Sports Science Institute for a year or two before I moved to the UK to then continue working in high performance sport. And I never would have actually thought I'd have ended up in menopause, but it happens to be that my career, because I was working in performance, shifted from looking after sporting athletes to just high performing individuals in general. So I remember being told by my boss, I've been working in the performance world for like 5 years, and he was saying to me, right, you're now going to look after this group, leaders in a bank, the C-suite of a bank, because I was kind of doing corporate well-being. And I was a bit petrified because I was only 28 years old probably at the time. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to be advising a whole group of leaders how to eat. I really have to impress because otherwise they're not going to have time for you. And my undergrad is actually in physiology and biochemistry. So the nature of the way that I work anyway is really understanding what's going on in the body to then apply okay, what am I going to be telling them what to eat? So I had a group of 11, of which two were women. So not enough, but two were women. And they were in their late 40s, early 50s. And that was the first time, Kate, in my career that I had actually been asked to give nutrition specifically for menopause. And when I reflected, I actually didn't really know how to make the guidance personalized to them, like I knew for all my other clients. And so for me, that was the beginning of what was my own journey in equipping myself as a clinician to make sure that I was giving the people in front of me the best possible advice. So actually, my book, this baby, started 15 years ago. This was my homework. And I obviously started seeing more and more because I work with high performing individuals. I work with lots of leaders. I started seeing more menopausal women. And for me, there was a massive gap because I had to realize I had to upskill myself in the advice that I was giving, but also I had nowhere to signpost them to. And I do a little bit of media work, as you said, and I had been approached to write a book on fat loss. And I remember thinking, right, I'm going to pivot this as an opportunity to write a book on food for menopause because there's nothing in this space. I've had to do a lot of learning and I want my clients to kind of have the information. And this was well before Davina did her thing. And I was rejected by all the publishers out there because it was ahead of the curve, ahead of the conversation. And I kind of, thought, okay, well, this is not going to happen. No one's wanting to talk about food for menopause. And that was the beginning of me thinking, well, I'm going to do it anyway. And I ended up doing a PhD. And my first year, my PhD was looking at menopause nutrition. But basically, Kate, a very long-winded way of saying that I fell into working in menopause nutrition, but I was so passionate about it because I realized there was a massive gap in the market. And for me, this book is a labor of love that I've kind of invested in over a period of time. But what is beautiful is also that everything happened at the right time. I think the book that I'd have written, 10 years ago when I first wanted to write it is very, very different to the book that I wrote now. And the book I wrote now is for me a toolkit. It is super, super practical because in the last decade, there's so much more information out there, which is brilliant. But sometimes what happens when we get so much information, we're just like, well, how does it translate into actually what I should be putting on my plate and how I should be making sure that I'm living?
Yeah. Do you know what? There's so much. I'm writing notes because I'm taking so much from what you're saying. And what I love about that, and actually, I'll probably totally just go offline from what I've actually wanted to ask you. But I think you're right. I think this space currently now, as you say, it wasn't 10 years ago when you had this foresight to write the book, but now there's a lot more there. And I think the problem that we've got is there's so much there that women are so confused. And as you've
Fuse.
said, you wanted to make this a practical toolkit, which it is. And I think that this is the problem is, and I know that you see it, is the mistruths that are out there. Women no longer know how to eat. So I guess I'm going to skip kind of to the more practical side of what I wanted to ask you, which is how do, in that case, through your research, through what you've done, the nutritional needs change during perimenopause? Like, because again, I think whenever we sort of talk about a specific group of people, whether it's exercise, whether it's nutrition, we're said that we're mellow washing, and we're not.
Yeah.
Most of us need to eat the same way, but our nutritional needs do fundamentally change. Can you just talk us through that and why?
Yeah. Brilliant. So fundamentally, we talk about this hormonal flux, and that's really relevant because of the impact that has on the multitude of symptoms that women experience. But if we kind of zone in and look what's happening on a physiological basis, there's a couple of stories that happen that inform me as a dietitian to advise the women what they should be eating. So there's a metabolic story, and that basically means that the way that we process, for example, carbohydrates and fat is different as we go through the perimenopause transition. And there's been research kind of shown that, if I'm recording this from Italy, so if I was to eat pasta pesto at lunchtime in my early 30s, the effect of that on my blood sugar levels, without being obsessed with blood sugar levels, is going to be different to what it is in my 40s. The message there is don't cut out carbs necessarily, but be really smart about the types that you're eating and the timing and the portion of when you're eating them. Okay, that's the metabolic story. Then there's an inflammatory story, but actually before the inflammatory story, there's a gut health story, and this is where nutrition has been evolving so much in the last 10 years, and we're still learning a lot about this. But what we know at the moment is that women have a more diverse microbiome than men. Okay, but as we go through that menopause transition, the diversity of our microbiome changes. And what we do know is that diversity of microbiome means thriving. So if you have a diverse microbiome, then it's doing all the functions and that it needs to be doing, right? So as you go through the perimenopause transition, if you're not proactive about getting the fermented foods in there, eating a variety of different foods, not boozing too much and having artificial sweeteners and all those things that we'll talk about, then you'll have a higher percentage of what we call obesogenic bacteria and inflammatory bacteria. So that basically means you have inflammation on a systemic level. You don't want that because that exacerbates every single symptom that there is, whether that's brain fog or mood or painful joints, which means we're not going to be wanting to do all the fantastic videos that you have on your app. So we don't want inflammation. And also obesogenic basically means that we've got the bacteria that extract all the calories from the food that we eat. And because we have that metabolic story going on where we're not as flexible with, whether we're burning fat or carbohydrate, it just means things like weight loss become harder. Now, weight is a very, very sensitive topic, but a lot of women do come to see me because they want me to help them manage their weight. And weight management becomes harder as you go through the perimenopause transition, but that doesn't mean that weight gain is inevitable. And then the third story is this inflammatory story. So, if I was to measure the bloods of somebody in their early phase or the bloods of someone going through a perimenopause transition, the woman in the perimenopause transition would have a higher amount of what we call pro-inflammatory markers. And we don't know why that is. It might be because of the changes that are happening in the gut. It might be because this hormonal flux itself is stressful to the body, or it might just be because the perimenopause transition is super intense. What do we do when we're stressed? Do we all crave a nice, lovely kale salad? No, we tend to go for the things that are sugary. And we want that drink at the end of the day to put that big fat full stop at the end of the day. So it could be that also behaviors and then also linking us to things that actually cause inflammation. But long story, this basically means from a nutrition point of view, the things that we need to put on our plate need to make sure that we're managing our blood sugar levels in a way that works for us, that we're eating to nourish our gut bacteria, and that we are also eating in an anti-inflammatory way. Now, what the hell does that mean in practice, Kate? You're probably going to ask me. Have I cued the next question right?
Well, you have, and yeah, you have pretty much, because again, I think it is that thing, isn't it? It sounds so complicated, and I can imagine
Yeah.
people listening, and it's like, okay, well, Linia just said blood sugar, we've just said gut bacteria, we've just said anti-inflammatory, but the reality is, I know this, and you're going to explain it. All of those three things you can hit with one particular diet. We're not telling you that you need to eat a different
No.
diet
Yeah.
to hit each of those targets.
Exactly, Kate. And so the Mediterranean diet, for example, is one of these diets that is tutored to be a diet that basically ticks all these boxes: anti-inflammatory, nourishes gut bacteria, and enjoyable. But it's just because there's lots of research around the Mediterranean diet. But I also work a lot in terms of working with different people of different ethnicities. And that's not to say that they need to start eating the Mediterranean diet. It's basically any traditional eating pattern that is based on whole foods, that is colourful, that has lots of herbs and spices and is tasty and has less ultra processed food. Now that doesn't mean that you can't eat crisps, or the Italians eat biscotti for breakfast, for God's sake. But what they do really well is overall they have a dietary pattern that is healthy, and that when they do eat the foods that are higher in sugar or higher in fat, they tend to be better quality. And you know what, it's how they eat as well. I always tell the story, Kate, that when I came over to Italy to do my PhD, and I remember the first day I was at the office and working away, and I had brought my lunch in, and I was going to eat my lunch at my desk like I did done in London for like 15 years of my career. And my boss came to me, and he's the head of the department, and he said, like, Linia, we stopped for lunch. And I was like, no, but I'm going to eat lunch here. And he's like, no, we stop for lunch. So it's also the way that they do life makes a massive difference. It's a lifestyle. The Dolce Vita is real. It does exist. And it's not necessarily about having this perfect diet, because it's not about that. Perfection doesn't exist. But it's about choosing the one thing that resonates with you and trying to then say, okay, I'm going to focus on that, and I'm going to do it consistently. Because that's one thing. If I put my performance hat on, what do high performers do well? They do simple things consistently. And the message I would love to get across, Kate, is it's not rocket science. It's probably the stuff that you've been told over and over again about balance and getting the vegetables half on your plate, some whole grain carbohydrates, quarter of your plate, and some protein. But we're not very good at doing that in a consistent way.
Yeah, and do you know what? Again, it's just writing things down because I'm listening and you're talking about the Mediterranean diet, and again, I think the French and certainly obviously the Parisians again, demographic where they they eat their croissant for breakfast, and they do
Yeah.
that all. You see, it's like you said, they do it in moderation. I think that
Mm.
that this is the key, isn't it? They're not restricting, they're not depriving, and I'm saying this is a very sweeping statement, obviously because I'm based here in the UK, but I do feel that the messaging continually for so many women, certainly the messaging that I received growing up, and this is the narrative that's really hard to
Mm.
change, is that we have to cut out large food groups in order to lose that weight that we might be putting on as we come into perimenopause. And then this leads women to that restriction, to that deprivation, which I think then they just get on this like cyclical, like yo-yo pattern.
100%.
They don't know what to do. And then they try fasting, and then they try keto, and then they try low fat, and then they try low carb, and they're completely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Let's go with that a little bit, because I do think at the moment there is a massive conversation around the fasting. I know for some women it works well. Our body does need a certain element of rest and digest, but I do believe, and I would love your knowledge as the expert here, that some women are just pushing that a little bit too far, and that when they do come back to eating after fasting, they're not refueling with the right foods, and they don't understand why change isn't happening.
Yeah, oh, I love that question, Kate, but there's lots of layers to that question. And maybe the first thing I'll talk about is, when I wrote the book, I wrote it in the way that I would be walking somebody through a consultation if they came to see me. So it's kind of understanding you, then eating for success, learning the fundamental principles of nutrition. But being a performance nutritionist working in sport, I know that nutrition is one tiny piece of the puzzle. And so how you move is just as important. How you sleep is important, and stress management. So the chapters of the book are eating for success, living for success, and recipes for success. And I just want to mention here that, you talked about the fact that women are in this very vicious cycle of deprivation. But one of the messages I wanted to get across in the book was this idea that it's a time of nourishment, not just physical nourishment, but actually inner nourishment as well, because we know that the perimenopause transition is stressful. I've kind of alluded to the fact that you have higher cortisol levels, which is the stress hormone already. So that means that, I see a lot of kind of type A driven individuals in my private practice. And these women are the women that just are juggling and are kicking ass and have been good at it and thrive on it. And suddenly they go through a perimenopause transition and they just don't have the level of resilience that they used to have. And then they start thinking that, they're a failure. And then it becomes really negative. And then they try harder and try harder and try harder, deprive more and more and more, and actually it just ends up getting really, really sad. And so I think that it's making sure that actually you're also nourishing yourself. That's not necessarily just physically, but also emotionally. And nutrition, when done badly, when done restrict too much, is a stress to the body. And this is when the argument around should women intermittent fast, shouldn't they intermittent fast? It depends. So absolutely, we do need some rest and digest time. So that's the idea that 12 hours between your last meal and breakfast being really good. And that also helps in terms of that thing that I talked about where we say women in the perimenopause transition are metabolically inflexible. So just allowing your body to have a pause and reset is really good. Now, some women would find that if they extend that fast, they feel really good doing it and it helps them concentrate. But some women, ask them to do that, they struggle. They really struggle and they feel really bad doing it. So again, it goes to the idea, Kate, that also sometimes I feel that as health professionals, we also give mixed messages in a way. And it's always, for me, the context is missing. And the context comes back to nutrition is all about guidance and guidelines. Use them purely as the word suggests, a guidance. How it works for you is really important. So check into you. No, be able to kind of say, well, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to maybe give it a couple of weeks to see whether it works for me. And if it actually doesn't feel right doing it, maybe it's not for you, darling, and it's absolutely okay. Find what works for you. And then, I often get asked, what's the best diet? Well, the best diet is the one that you enjoy, that you feel good doing, that's sustainable for you. And that means I can't just go plug into ChatGPT, give me a diet plan, because it's going to give me something that's generic that's not necessarily for me.
Do you know, I love that. And I always tell the story, and people, I'm sure, have heard me say it before, but it's that brilliant thing of, so I have worked out, and I love what you say there. I'm going to just reiterate that, like being an advocate for your own health and finding what works for you is so
Mm,
important. And it is the same with exercise. What works for me might not work for the next person because our bodies all function differently. Someone will build muscle easier than others, all of that sort of stuff. So when I came to discovering how to eat properly in my perimenopause journey, because I used to be the biggest, I mean, I had disordered eating all my life. So for me, the idea of actually upping my food and my
mm,
protein was a really, really hard thing to navigate, but I did it. And it's been the best and biggest game changer in terms of my energy levels, building muscle, my
right.
emotional resilience, all of that. But so there I am thinking, okay, everyone talks about having Greek yogurt for breakfast, some nuts and some berries and some this and some that. My body literally can't do that. If I have Greek yogurt as my first meal of the day, something, I don't know what it is, says sugar. Sugar, sugar, sugar.
Yeah,
I literally want sugar. So for
yeah.
me, I've worked out I have to have, and I had it this morning. I had like some tofu, fried it up in some olive
Brilliant.
oil, two eggs, sort of scrambled it together, spinach, flaxseed, some pumpkin seeds, a little bit of apple cider vinegar, and a little side of kimchi, and I'm done. And that, I can tell you, will keep me full for a good 4 hours, and I feel
Mm,
energized and balanced. I had to work that out because every time I had the
brilliant.
Greek yogurt, I was like, I'm still hungry, or I'm hungry 2 hours later. And so
Yeah.
it's exactly that. Don't feel that because someone is saying that's what you have to do, you have to do it. Like you have to work out what works for you is so important.
100%. I couldn't agree with that enough, Kate, because I think that also, for example, protein is very topical. You have some people saying we're eating enough protein. You have some people saying we're not eating enough protein, and it's just like I feel so sorry for the general public because it's like, what do they do? What do they know? What do they do? How do they know who to follow? And at the end of the day, It's actually very relative. If I put my public health research hat on and we look at the national guidance, we see that from the national surveys, we are eating enough based on the old way that we used to measure protein requirements. The field has evolved, and now there's new ways called an amino acid oxidation method or something like that, which suggests that perhaps those old requirements were an underestimation. But we're not there yet, so the guidance hasn't changed. Okay, I get that on a national level, that's what we're seeing, and that's what my public health hat on, as I said, I would be saying is happening. But clinically, I see something very, very different. And again, the context I say is maybe I also have a biased cohort because I work very much with very active people, high-performing individuals who perhaps have higher protein needs. So this isn't for me about not eating enough protein or eating too much. Find your sweet spot of protein. How do you find your sweet spot? Exactly what Kate's been talking about. When she kind of dabbled with a different breakfast, which one kept her full up for longer, which one made her, feel that her blood sugar levels were balanced so she wasn't craving more things. That's what it's about, Kate. It's about saying, okay, tune into me. All these different health professionals are saying something slightly different. Let me tune into me and try and understand my body. And I think sometimes we've given so much power outside of ourselves. And my message is always kind of just like when I work with people, is I make suggestions. And I teach individuals to try tune into themselves so that they find their sweet spot, because that's what it always is. What's your sweet spot for protein? What's your sweet spot for carbohydrates? And I'm sure it's the same for exercise. It's not all about doing, we would love to all be doing, 2 or 3 times the weight training, but some people can only do 10 minutes. That's better than nothing. And so it's finding that sweet spot in all aspects of life.
That is such sensible advice. Here's my question. Can you eat too much protein?
Yes, absolutely you can. You can eat too much of anything. You can have too many apples, And nutrition is all about that, is it's literally this dance of finding the balance. Because if you eat too much protein, then you don't get the return on investment on that. So for example, we're talking grams, so 2 grams per kilogram body weight or 2.2 grams per kilogram body weight. At that point, so I get some, at high top athletes who are basically having lots of muscle damage because they're playing in rugby and all of that need those protein requirements. But if they eat more than that, what that does is it just displaces other key nutrients like carbohydrates because perhaps they're not as hungry. And then that means that they're not nourishing their gut bacteria as well. And remember, it always works in this balance. And so it's making sure that for all the nutrients, you find the range. And also the other thing Kate, is that nutrition is also this journey. So it might mean that at the beginning, I might have somebody on slightly higher protein intake because I want them to maybe, manage their appetite, so manage their sugar cravings, become more metabolically flexible. But over time, that might change a little bit based on how their body's responding. Nutrition is never static. And I think we have to be open to this idea that it's an evolution, and actually it's an evolution that leaves flexibility there as well.
Okay, I'm loving this. I've got another question for you. Again, it's one that I'm asked very frequently. I again have my own views on this. I think we'll probably have similar views from your answers so far. Eating before a workout, after a workout, working out fasted. And the reason I ask you this, and I know again, lots of dietitians, nutritionists have their own viewpoint, but it's the fact that you work with elite athletes. So I know that I work with, obviously, I like to see everyone as an elite athlete, in that if you are
Me
moving and
too,
you're
Kate.
building strength,
Yeah.
I think we're all athletes. But because you've got the research behind that, like what do you see, or what would you say to that question? Working out fasted, or what do we do afterwards?
Okay, I always say it depends, and I'll explain that because so we know that women are more sensitive to large calorie deficits, and that basically means that if they create a large calorie deficit, or if they go faster than exercise and exercise, they're more likely to tap into muscle mass quicker than a man would. Okay, and that kind of has an evolutionary basis behind it. So that means that women do need to be more on top of how they eat around exercise. Now, I love exercising. I've done lots of triathletes in my life, but I don't wake up and want to eat a big, massive breakfast before I go do a long run. So that basically just means that puts more pressure on me having my during exercise nutrition, if I need it, if I'm training more than an hour, or my recovery nutrition. So that doesn't mean I'm forcing myself to eat before, even though that might help in terms of me not tapping into my muscle mass. But it just means that I'm very conscious that I need to recover harder. So I would say, again, find out what works for you. So if you find that actually fasted training works for you, and you feel good doing it, go for it, but then recover hard and recover fast. So very often I would be creating my breakfast or my recovery snack before I exercise. So I come home while I'm undressing and all of that, I'm either drinking a smoothie that I've made or I'm eating while I kind of get ready, for example.
Yeah, no, and you're like me, actually. I'm up first thing in the morning. I don't find it easy to eat before I work out. I feel very sort of gassy and bloated, and kind of go with that. Again, taking us on another route, because I think, again, we are living in a society, and if you sort of touched on it about, refueling after a workout. So if I said to you, this is what I do in the morning, and I'm not suggesting this for other women, and it works for me. The research I know is still needs to be done on a lot of these things. I like having a coffee in the morning. It gives me energy. I do add to my coffee like an MCT powder, because actually I don't like black coffee, and it just for me makes it feel milky. I don't do it to extend a fast or to tap into anything or anything like that. And I may add some collagen powder as well. Again, people say to me, does it work? I don't know, because again, that the research needs to be done. I want to be really, really adamant on that, that I am not the professional here. What is your take on that? Like, if someone says to you, okay, MCT powder or a collagen powder, or even like a protein shake. I do avoid the protein shakes because they are very, very sugary and very processed. And I will always, as I say, refuel heavily after my workout with good whole foods, nourishing, diverse, protein rich, fibre rich, carbohydrate, good carb meal. Talk me through maybe that kind of MCT, that sort of process that we're in at the moment.
So again, I would be saying to you, I'd be wanting to know how you slept the night before, how you wake up feeling, because that has an impact. If you wake up wired, then perhaps that might not be the best way to start the day, because then it might just be exacerbating cortisol levels. But if you're waking up, nice and kind of zen, you slept well and all is good, and that works for you, then I would be saying, okay, so the coffee, the stimulant, I love my coffee first thing in the morning, but some people would say wait a couple of hours before you have your coffee, but who's got time to kind of wait around for the coffee, right? But then the MCT oil is interesting because from a sports point of view, MCT oils are a type of fuel that the body uses, particularly if you're following a lower carbohydrate diet. So if you were in a fasted state, your body then would be really able to utilize those fuels and you would feel really good doing it. Also, that tends to work well for people who perhaps have intolerances with certain types of sugars in their gut for fueling as well. Okay. But from a point of view of, okay, I hate counting calories, but calories do count to some extent in terms of, okay, what is the rest of your diet kind of looking like? You are more or less putting oil into your coffee. So if your day allows for you to have that, go for it. And if you enjoy it, go for it. But if I would be saying, what are your cholesterol levels like? What's the rest of your day looking like? It might change the advice that I'd be giving in terms of that coffee. And then I'm a food first all the way. So where you can get your protein sources from food, because, in that beautiful food matrix, we're getting loads of other things other than just the protein. But, protein powders, I suppose, do have their role because they're convenient. So if I'm in the gym, for example, and I'm going out, perhaps then I might want to be tapping into something like a protein powder. I hope that answered your question enough,
Yeah,
Kate.
it does. I have another question actually. Look, we're going to be here all day. I would like to know, it's just on that. It's interesting you say that. I recently had some blood tests. I always love asking an expert a question and getting a diagnosis during one of my podcasts. It's always good. And I had high HDL. So they're not worried because it's obviously
Yeah.
the good high cholesterol. And just when you said that about MCTs, I don't take the oil, I take powder. But obviously and I was like, well, I eat loads of oily fish. I do eat a lot of salmon. I eat a lot of nuts and seeds. I eat a lot of pumpkins. I eat a lot of flaxseed. That is literally at the heart of my diet. And they said, and that kind of funny enough pulls me back to that question about protein. They were like, well, sometimes too much of a good thing. And they have obviously alluded to the fact that perhaps that high HDL could be through that diet that I'm eating. Could it be the MCT oil?
Yeah, it definitely. So HDL is your good cholesterol, and HDL is affected by both diet and physical activity. So it
Okay.
could also be physical activity that has as having an impact on that, as well as the oils. You're eating quite a high fat diet. And for me, Kate, it sounds like you eat well. One of the questions I'd be saying is, what's your fiber intake like? Because we also know, whilst protein is really important, the fiber message needs to come out loud and clear, because it is the thing that nourishes our gut bacteria. It's like giving kids packets of Smarties. They just go crazy for the stuff. And so what tends to happen, if we're perhaps eating more fat and more protein, is that the nutrient that suffers is fiber. And that's really, really important. And, I'm preparing for a presentation on heart health for health professionals. And one of the things is that very often women in the perimenopause transition, even if they've had really good cholesterol levels their whole life, suddenly as they go through the perimenopause transition, because of the role of the changing amounts of follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, and estrogen, naturally their cholesterol, their LDL, bad cholesterol levels start increasing. And so one of the ways that you can really support your body doing that is eating the right types of fats, like you've mentioned, but eating more fiber.
30 grams of fibre a day, is that correct?
It is, but in some of the European countries, the guidelines is 35 grams. So I would kind of be saying, aim between 30 to 40 grams.
I do eat a lot of fibre, but I think I could eat more, actually, you having said that. I had a kiwi last night. They're good and fibrous, aren't they? And
Well
vitamin
done,
C.
exactly. Two kiwis, 5 grams of fiber.
Yeah, and really good to keep you regular as well. And actually, while we're there, I think that's another thing that women experience when they come in, and you've talked about that, is constipation as well, and a change of
Yeah.
bowel habits. And I guess, again, that's perhaps slightly because they might be restricting, they're not eating enough fibre, so they're not regular.
Yeah, so for me, constipation, I'd be kind of talking about the F's. So are you getting your fluid in? That's a really important one. The first principle in my book is hydration. That's a good cue. Cue Kate is drinking some water. So hydration is so important. My first job, actually working in performance, was working as the hydration queen, basically measuring how hydrated players were before they trained, after they trained, because that has a massive impact on not just physical performance, but how we think, our mood, energy levels, digestion. So get a fluid right, get fiber right, and then add in some fermented food in there. So I was traveling today. I came home and I made myself a nice omelette on some toast, and I added some kimchi onto it. So I would always say, have you eaten something fermented every day? Because we need to make sure that we're repopulating our gut bacteria with something fermented every day as well.
Love that. Now I'm going to finish on one question, which is, what would you like every woman who I guess is coming into this life stage, perimenopause, through and beyond, to know? What would be your biggest takeout tip for them?
No, my takeout tip, even though I'm a dietitian, is not going to be nutrition related, Kate. It goes back to the essence of this conversation, which is know you. Because know you so that you know that how the symptoms show up for you as you go through the perimenopause transition, because those symptoms are going to be different from one person to the next person. Know you so that when you get the tools, whether that's coming from a dietitian, a nutritionist, or a fantastic exercise specialist like Kate, so you know what works for you as an individual. And then the last thing for me is, and we don't focus enough on it, is know you so well that you know how to top up your cup. Because I see so many women who put themselves last on the list. And as a result, they go through this really, really intense, vulnerable transition, pouring out of an empty cup. And then it just makes everything so much harder. It makes even adopting eating well harder. And so the more you actually focus on nourishing your inner you, and sometimes, the conversations I have, Kate, is women have almost forgotten themselves so much in this race that is life, that they come to this point and I'm saying to them, I want you to nourish your inner you today. What are you going to do for you? They almost don't even know what that is that would make them fill up their cup. So know you so you know how to nourish your inner you, because the more you focus on that, promise, the easier it becomes to start implementing some of these nutrition, lifestyle kind of factors that we're encouraging you to take on board to make this transition easier, but also being a performance nutritionist, make it one where you're still thriving through it.
I love that. Thank you. And of course, it's all in here, everybody.
It
Food for
is.
Menopause. Incredible. I mean, I don't want to stop looking because it is about my lunchtime and I'm looking at, but I've literally fallen on one of my favourite pages, which is smashed broccoli. I love broccoli.
Yay.
I love roasting vegetables. I love cauliflower. I love broccoli. It's amazing. So from me to you, thank you for writing it. For my audience and for everyone who's watched it, do go and grab yourself a copy. And Linia, where can people find you other than obviously buying this book? What are your like Instagram handles for more info?
So my Instagram handles are Linear Nutrition, and on kind of most of social media, I'm Linear Nutrition or Linia Patel. And the book
Amazing.
is available on Amazon and in
Yes.
Waterstones as well.
Go get it. Thank you so much for your time. And I mean, I could have sat here for ages. We probably need to have this conversation again. And I might even invite you to come and talk to the actual Owning Your Menopause community because I think your wisdom would be very, very valuable and well received over there. So let's
Oh,
chat.
thank you, Kate. And I must just actually, I want to honor you because I remember after I had written this book, I mean, I thought the job was writing the book, but then when they kind of like, actually, you just have to go promote, I was like, what? And I reached out to you and to kind of say, oh, I've just written a book. I'd love to send you a copy. And you were so kind in your messaging in terms of you just, as a first time author, you just reassured me about the process that I was going through, how hard it was, and the fact that women like you were supporting me, and I remember being really blown back by that, the kindness of your message, and it's definitely something that I will pay forward to a new author that I come across. So thank you
No,
for supporting women and for all that you do as well.
thank you. I really appreciate that. I know how hard it is. We've got to stick together.
Absolutely.
See you soon.